This Parsha podcast is dedicated in honor and for the success of Noam Yitzchak ben Shlomi. May he be successful in all his endeavors. I have to say, no, I do not approve of it. Not one little bit. I have to publicly and clearly register my displeasure. I disavow. Yes, I disavow. I disavow the Parsha podcast drinking game that I understand some of y'all are playing. I do not approve. Who came up with such a game? So from what I understand, people are taking a shot. Every time I use a thesaurus word, every time I ask for feedback challenges or questions to the email, rabbi@gmail.com, every time I place an emphasis, a stress on a word or a phrase, and apparently there's two shots if the word is also a thesaurus word. Anytime I mention the beautiful, the glorious Torch Center in Houston, Texas, and you have to take two shots, as I understand it, every time I refer to my grandfather, a blessed memory. Now, I was also told that there's like a more advanced, expanded version of the Parsha podcast drinking game. Another shot every time I say the Talmud tells us, or every time I say so to speak. Who came up with this? They are apparently making a t-shirt out of it. There's going to be swag. Parsha podcast drinking game swag. What's next? Are people going to be wearing a t-shirt that says, I listened to the whole Parsha podcast all the way to the end, and all I got was this lousy hangover? Am I going to have to slap a parental advisory on the Parsha podcast logo? I disavow. But I understand that some listeners want to spice it up. And that's welcome. But how can you follow the Parsha podcast when you're in a stupor? How can you understand all the intricacies of the Parsha podcast if you're under the influence? How can you go backstage and go into the deep insights of the Parsha with your friends at the Torch Center, at the glorious, beautiful Torch Center, if you're a little buzzed? This was my dilemma last couple of days. How do you address this problem? On one hand, I'm kind of flattered that they have the Parsha podcast drinking game. And I don't want to alienate the people who make this game and are so invested in the Parsha podcast. But come on, aren't we teetotalers outside of Purim? How can I condone such behavior? This was my dilemma. What to do? And I came up with a solution. I'm not even going to talk about the solution. I'm not going to mention it in the Parsha podcast, of course. I'm not going to talk about the Parsha podcast drinking game. I'm going to do something sneaky, something a bit devilish. I'm going to make it very, very hard for people to play the game. Yeah, you want to play the game? Okay, I'll play the game. Let's see how many bottles of Jim Beam you have in the cupboard. Is that a good idea? Is that a good way to stamp out this dastardly conduct? Let me know if this is a good idea. Email me. The email again. The email, rabbi@gmail.com. Forgive my grandiloquent soliloquy. Grandiloquent soliloquy! Gotta emphasize it. My grandfather, a blessed memory, would not approve. But alas, I'm in the Torch Center in Houston, Texas, the glorious, beautiful Torch Center in Houston, Texas. And these are the kinds of issues that we're facing. We have a brand new book, the book of Exodus, the book of Shemos. It's the book of Shemos. It's Parshas Shemos. We have to thank the Almighty for bringing us to this point. And we hope and we pray that we will indeed succeed in being able to study this book together each week on the Parsha podcast from the Torch Center in Houston, Texas. Our book, of course, talks about the descent of the nation to Egypt. They get mistreated severely. They get marginalized. They are oppressed. They are enslaved. They are tormented. And we read about Moshe, his origin, his coming of age, his journey, his transition from Prince of Egypt to refugee in Midian, to shepherd of his father-in-law Jethro's sheep, and the burning bush, and the instruction to go save the Jewish people. And of course, we read about the plagues, and the plague of the firstborn, and the matzah, and the chametz, and the exodus, and the splitting of the sea, and the manna, and the magical, miraculous wellspring of water, and the war against Amalek, and the arrival of Jethro, and the sign of revelation, and the tablets, and the golden calf, and the tabernacle, and the vessels of the tabernacle, and the vestments of the high priest. There's a lot to talk about in this book. And it ends with a crescendo, with the nation building the tabernacle and the presence of God descending to their midst. There's a very interesting introduction to the book of Shemos found in one of the great commentators, Hamek Davar it's called. He observes that all the books of the Torah have nicknames, all with the exception of the book of Exodus. So Genesis, Bereshis, it's known as Sefer HaYashar, the book of the upright. And Leviticus, Vayikra, is called Torah's Kohanim, the Torah, the instruction of the priests. And Numbers, Bamidbar, is known as the book of Pikudim, the book of counting. And Deuteronomy, Devarim, is Mishnah Torah, the repetition of Torah. It's only our book, the book of Exodus, the book of Shemos, that does not have a nickname in the writings of our sages. It does sort of have a nickname. It's called Chumash Hasheni, the second book. So the question is, either title the books 1 through 5, but Genesis is not called book 1, and Leviticus is not book 3, and so on. They all have proper names and nicknames, and the nickname of Exodus is book 2. And what he proposes, a very fascinating idea. Genesis has 2 volumes. There's volume 1 and volume 2. There are 2 books of Genesis, Genesis and Exodus. Genesis is about creation. And guess what? So is Exodus. It's also about creation. Because creation is only completed when the events of the Exodus happen. Of course, the Exodus, according to our timeline, it happened 2,448 years after Adam. But until the Exodus, until our book, Genesis is incomplete. What happens in this book? Well, the first thing that happens is we meet a nation, the nation of Israel. Of course, the nation of Israel has its roots in Genesis, Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob, and Jacob's 12 sons and the 70 souls that descend to Egypt. But the first time that our people are called a nation is in Exodus chapter 1, verse 9. Up to that point, they're a family. They're not quite a nation. The experience in Egypt solidifies this people into a nation, transforms this people, this family, into a nation. That's the story of the descent into Egypt, of the crucible of Egypt. It's the factory in which the nation is formed. Exodus is about forming a nation that upholds the mission of Abraham. It's making a nation that is dedicated towards fulfilling the objective of creation. In this book of Exodus, there is a nation that's formed, that's forged in the fire, in the crucible. A nation that's determined to bring the world to perfection, that's determined to rectify the sin of Adam. In our book, a nation is founded. A nation is founded with the explicit mission statement of making the world, the entire world, recognize and accept and bow before the Almighty, omnipotent God. Genesis is not complete. Creation is not complete until this nation is founded. And the founding happens in the book of Exodus, in Genesis, volume 2. What else happens in this book? Of course, there's the Sinai revelation, the most monumental and consequential event in all of human history. There's a nation recently departed from Egypt, and they're coalescing around the mountain. And they hear prophecy collectively as a nation. And they receive the Almighty's holy Torah. This, too, is part of the completion of Genesis. Genesis is incomplete until the Torah is given to humanity. Until the tools to perfect the world, to fulfill the world's purpose, have been entrusted to humanity. Until that point, Genesis is still a work in progress. The world, creation, is still under construction. The Torah is given to humanity. It's given to our people. In the book of Exodus, Genesis is not complete until this point. Well, how does the book end? The last event is when the Almighty dwells in the tabernacle. We built a home for him, and he dwelled inside of it. The presence of God, as it were, resides here. The presence of God is in this world. The world's not divorced from God. He is amongst us. That's how Exodus concludes. And the world's not complete. Genesis is not complete until that happens. Indeed, the book of Exodus is Genesis volume 2. That's a fascinating idea to begin the book with. Let's take a look at the Parsha. Let's examine it. Let's go a bit backstage. And let's learn. We're going to learn something very powerful. We're going to learn about the Parsha, backstage, and then an idea, a theme that's strung throughout the length and the breadth of the Parsha. A theme, an idea that will open up new vistas and new opportunities for us all. The Parsha begins with enumerating the sons of Jacob. These are the names, the Shemos, the names of the sons of Jacob who descended to Egypt with him. And that, of course, happened in Genesis. We're revisiting the events of Genesis. Genesis chapter 46, Jacob descends to Egypt with his children and grandchildren, the 70 souls that descended with Jacob to Egypt. And the verse tells us, verse 5, all the souls who emerged from the thigh of Jacob were 70 souls. V'Yosef haya b'Mitzrayim. And Joseph was in Egypt. Now we, of course, know, Rashi tells us, that Joseph was in Egypt. Didn't we know that already? What's the verse telling us? V'Yosef, and Joseph was in Egypt. That's information that we know very, very well. Says Rashi, this is teaching us the righteousness of Joseph. That Joseph, who was in Canaan and served as a shepherd for the sheep of his father. That's the same Joseph that went down to Egypt. That's the same Joseph that became a king in Egypt after 13 years of enslavement and incarceration. And even now, after his family follows him, he is still the same Joseph, as righteous as ever. Even though Joseph was away from his family for 22 long years, he's isolated, he's distant, he's in the spiritual cesspool of Egypt. He's the same Joseph, the righteous, the same Joseph that used to be a shepherd. It's the same Joseph in Egypt, the same Joseph now king in Egypt. No matter what happens to him, he is steadfast in his righteousness. My grandfather, blessed memory, used to say Joseph was plucked away from his family at 17. He was a really young man, and he's sent to Egypt, which is the spiritual abyss. It's the place that most thoroughly rejects the values and the priorities and the mores of his family. And despite everything that happens to him, his spiritual standing is not harmed an iota. My grandfather used to tell his students, you're 17 when you enter the yeshiva. Imagine you're kidnapped and you're sent for 22 years, not to Egypt, but to a kibbutz, an anti-religious kibbutz. And you're there for years. And every time you insist on eating kosher food, they ridicule you and they mock you and they laugh at you. And every time you put on your tefillin, every time you say a blessing, every time you pray, every time you study Torah, there's mockery and derision. Could you withstand that for 22 years and not be spiritually harmed? That's a tall task. Joseph was in Egypt. And the verse tells us he's still part of the 70 souls. He's still part of the family of Jacob. He's still enumerated amongst that list. He's still part of the 70 highly perfected souls that descended down to Egypt. We've suggested in the past that the definition, the spiritual definition of a king, is someone who opens the path for others to follow. Why was the tribe of Judah the tribe of the monarchy? Because the prince of Judah, Nachshon ben Aminadav, when everyone else was talking, everyone else was fearful, he jumped. He jumped into the water. God says, go, he goes. And when the waters reached his nostrils, he cried out to heaven, and the waters separated, they opened. And other people followed on the dry land. That's what makes someone a king, where they are able to demonstrate to others what they need to do. He split the sea and allowed others to follow. Joseph was also a king. He blazed the path for the nation in Egypt. Egypt is the antithesis of what the Torah is trying to make us into. In fact, we have a verse in the Torah, not to behave like an Egyptian, because everything that they did is the opposite of the Torah. And there was one man who was sent ahead of everyone else. He was submerged in that cesspool. And he maintained his very lofty and elevated status. Joseph was in Egypt. And that's why he's a king. And that's why the book begins with him. He was in Egypt, and he prepared the territory for everyone else. He demonstrated that it's possible to be in Egypt, to be surrounded by this spiritual decay and not be harmed. The verse continues, Joseph, he died. His brothers died. The entire generation passed. Ubnei Israel and the Israelites, they proliferated, they grew, and they became mighty and numerous in a great fashion. And the land was filled with them. Vayakar melech chadash al Mitzrayim, there was a new king that arose over Egypt who didn't know Joseph. Was this actually a new king or someone who pretended to not remember Joseph? Different opinions. There's a new regime in town regardless. And this new Pharaoh, he undertakes a malevolent, sinister, and insidious plan to destroy the Jews. Let's be wise, he tells his nation. Havanas chakma, let's be smart and wise and clever in how we tackle the Jewish problem. This is the mark of all the anti-Semites. They plot and they scheme and they are clever and smart in the ways that they tried to destroy the Jewish nation. The Ramban explains, Pharaoh would have loved to unleash the army against the Jews. But he didn't want to do that. It was insidious. It was clever. Boil the frog. First, there's a tax on the Jews. And then let's enslave them with back-breaking labor. Let's embitter their lives with harsh labor. And then let's tell the midwives, only kill the males in a way that the mothers don't notice. And then we'll tell the individual Egyptians to go kill the males. And the Ramban even tells us that there was the veneer of police protection afforded to the Jews. When an Egyptian would snatch a Jewish male and throw him into the water, they would listen. Oh, this is a crime. And they try to collect evidence to try to indict the murderer. This is a slow process. In the end, it's just overt infanticide. All the boys must be chucked into the Nile. But of course, their plans backfired. V'cha'asher ya'anu oso, the verse tells us, just as they increased their torment and oppression, to that degree, the nation grew. And they were beside themselves. Everything backfired. There's a delicious comment in Rashi. If you read the verse 12, there's a little bit of a technical problem, because the verse says, and as they tormented, so too can yirbe, so too they will increase. Not that they increased, they will increase. It's in a future tense. So why is the word they increased in the future, they will increase? Kain yirbe. It should have said Kain rava. They increased. So Rashi tells us a midrashic interpretation. If you look at verse 10 and verse 12, they both have the same word, yirbe. Pharaoh told his advisors, maybe they will increase. So let's make all these plans to destroy their growth, to stunt their growth, to tamp down their proliferation. That same word is what happened to them in their face. You tried to not prevent the yirba, you got the yirba. All the scheming and all the plotting and all the evil, malevolent designs bore no fruit. The result was the opposite. You tried to stop the yirba, and you got the yirba. Every step that they took to prevent the nation's proliferation would actually lead to further augmentation and proliferation. And then we read about the episode of Shifra and Pua, two midwives. The king tells the two midwives, who are Shifra and Pua, or they're called Shifra and Pua, Rashi tells us they're actually Yocheved and Miriam, to kill the Jewish baby boys during childbirth. And these heroic women did not listen. Verse 17, Vatirena hamiyaldos es Elokim. These midwives, they feared God, and they didn't listen to Pharaoh. And not only did they not kill the babies, they gave them life. They didn't listen to Pharaoh. Why not? Because they feared God. And the commentators observe that the Torah typically does not tell us what was behind a person's act of righteousness. It doesn't tell us, oh, they had this attribute, and therefore that animated, that catalyzed, that prompted, that instigated, that brought about, that effectuated the given deed. For example, any righteous act or any noble act that is documented in the Torah, we could be told why they did that. Why did Abraham treat the guests with such overwhelming kindness? We don't know. The Torah doesn't tell us. Was it his fear of God, his love of kindness? We don't know. The Torah doesn't tell us. We imagine it's because he had this attribute of kindness. But again, Scripture itself does not tell us what was behind the righteous act. But here it does. They feared God. Why is this story different than similar stories of heroism and righteousness? So the commentators explain something very profound. The king gave a very clear instruction to the midwives to kill the Jewish boys. And if someone defies the king, well, that's a capital crime, of course. So, on one hand, how can you listen to the king? It's unconscionable what he's asking us to do. On the other hand, how could you defy him? It's a test. Of course, the right thing to do is to not listen to the king. But how do you make sure that you have the courage to do so? How do you earn the bravery, the courage, the resolve, the fortitude to do what's right? Vatirena hamialdos es Elokim. They did an act of fear of God. They summoned fear of God. They amplified fear of God within themselves. What does that mean? They dwelled on the fact that the true determinant of a person's behavior should be God, not some human, even if the human is a king. They thought about the consequences of their behavior. A major part of fear of God is to recognize that our actions There's a cause and effect. There's reward and punishment. What do you stand to gain by listening to God, and what do you risk losing by violating his will? Recognizing that this world is only temporary, and our actions will reverberate for all eternity for our soul. These are all exercises in fear of God. They did that. They did those exercises. And that gave them the strength, the courage to do what's right. Meaning, the Torah doesn't tell us what's behind someone's action, but the Torah does tell us the action itself. Fear of God is not what prompted the act. In itself was the act that they did. I think it's a very fascinating idea. It's a little bit of a subtle point. How do you overcome a difficult test? On one hand, there's something which is the right thing to do. On the other hand, it's hard because it's risky, it's dangerous, it's difficult for whatever reason. You disobey the king's explicit command, you'll be killed. No questions asked. Summary execution. What do you do about it? One of the ways that they did it is they summoned a dose of fear of God. That was the act that enabled them to do what's right. Now, Pharaoh, of course, he summoned these two women. What are you doing? Why? These kids all surviving? No, you don't understand. These are not like Egyptian women. They're feral. We show up, the baby's born already. And the verse tells us that these women were amply rewarded. They were merited, or they earned houses. Which houses? The house of the priesthood, of the Levites, the monarchy. They descend from these women. Now, Pharaoh was not content with simply asking the Jewish midwives to kill babies. He decreed that all baby boys are to be tossed into the river. Why did he do that? The stargazers, our sages tell us, they told him that there's going to be a redeemer. We see it in the stars. He's to save the nation. He's going to remove them all from Egypt. But he has a weakness. He has a vulnerability. He has an Achilles heel. And that's water. He's going to be punished with water. So let's nip this in the bud. Let's eliminate the potential threat before it can actualize its goal. Take all the males and chuck them all to the water. You'll solve the problem. You'll drown the Redeemer. And of course, it didn't work out. Chapter 2, we meet the person who will be the central character of the Torah going forward. That's Moshe. A Levite man married a Levite woman. This is Amram. That's the man. He's a great grandson of Levi. And he married Yocheved, granddaughter of Levi. I misspoke. Moshe himself was a grandson of Levi and a great-grandson of Levi. But his father was a grandson. His mother was a daughter of Levi. So correct the record. Maybe I'm partaking in the Parsha podcast drinking game here as myself. Okay, that's a Levite man married a Levite woman. And she had a baby. That's Moshe. Now, Sages tell us that they were already married. They already had two children. Aaron and Miriam are Moshe's older siblings, born to Amram and Yocheved. But they got divorced. When Pharaoh decreed that every male will be killed by being thrown into the water, Amram made the calculation. These are not good conditions in which it's proper to be married. You're married, you might have kids, and how could you bring kids into this world? You'll have a child only to see them be drowned. So he divorced his wife. And given that he was the leader of the Jewish people, the Israelites followed suit. They too divorced their wives. But Miriam, Amram's daughter, she said to him that you're making a decree that's worse than Pharaoh's. You're worse than Pharaoh. Why? Because Pharaoh's decree, it's only on the males. He has no problem with the women. Your decree, Amram, by separating the husbands and wives, there won't be any males or females. You're worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh decreed only on their bodies. Someone's born and they're killed because they're Jewish. They have a soul from conception. And that soul can achieve its purpose in life. So his decree is terrible, but it's only the bodies, not the souls. But you, by separating husband and wife, by separating husbands and wives, you're preventing anyone from being conceived and born. You're condemning their soul as well. You're preventing them from achieving their spiritual destiny. And finally, Pharaoh's decree, we don't know if it's going to be carried out. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. If you're separating the Jewish men and women, your decree will necessarily succeed. You are worse than Pharaoh. That's what Miriam told her father. And Amram accepted. And he married. The Levite man married the Levite woman. And she had a baby. And the baby was good. When he was born, Exodus tells us that the entire home was awash with a brilliant light. And she hid him for 3 months. And at the end of the 3 months, she couldn't hide him any longer. She placed him in a little makeshift boat, a little floaty device, and placed him in the water. And with his sister Miriam watching from a distance to see what happens, Moshe, a 3-month-old baby, is floating on the river. And then someone else joins the party. Pharaoh's daughter, according to our tradition, she's called Basia or Bisya. She's going to the river. She's going to wash off the river. Why is she going to wash? I say to tell us that she wanted to go to the mikveh. She wanted to have a ritual bath because she wanted to cleanse herself from the execrable idolatries of her father's house. She wanted to convert. She wanted to join the Jewish nation, the Israelites. She wanted to embrace monotheism. She wanted to embrace the God of the Israelites. And she's there in the water, and she spots the bots. And she sends for it with her Amma. Chapter 2, verse 5. Vateres ateva, she saw the bots in the sea, in the river. Vatishlach es amasa, she sent her Amma to go fetch the bots. What's the Amma? So Rashi offers 2 interpretations. First interpretation is that Amma is like Amma, Hebrew word which means a maidservant. So she had a maidservant. She sent the maidservant to go fetch the bots. The second interpretation is that the word Amma relates to a hand or an arm, which is why the Hebrew word for a cubit is an Amma, and that's the length of an arm. She sent her arm to go fetch the bots. And Rashi tells us from our sages, you don't send your arm, you pluck it, right? You take it. What do you mean to send your arm? It means she sent her arm, she stretched out, but she couldn't reach it. And her arm just was sent further. Her arm got longer. It extended, stretched out, until she was able to reach to grasp the box. Fascinating little anecdote here. She couldn't reach the box. She reached out for it nonetheless, and a miracle happened. She finds the baby. She adopts the baby. Moshe refuses to nurse from an Egyptian wet nurse. He's eventually given to his own mother, his biological mother, Yocheved, to nurse him. And then he's weaned. He's given back to his adoptive mother, Basia or Bisya or Batya. And he grows up as a prince in Pharaoh's household. And of course, the irony is not lost on anyone. Pharaoh, we got to get rid of this redeemer. Let's throw all the babies just to make sure we get him. We don't miss him. All the babies will throw it to the water. Not only did Pharaoh not prevent the Redeemer from being born and from surviving, he raised him in his own household. The verse continues with Moshe's coming of age. He goes out the first day. He's inspecting the well-being of his brethren. He sees an Egyptian man striking a Hebrew man. He kills him. He buries him in the sand. The next day he sees 2 Hebrew men fighting. Again he intervenes. And these craven poltroons, they snitch on him. And they tell Pharaoh, he killed the Egyptian yesterday. And Moshe's a wanted man. And Moshe, they attempt to kill him. He flees. He ends up in Midian. And he goes to the well. He wants to find a wife. That's what Jacob did. That's what Moshe will do. And he meets 7 daughters of Jethro. And they're being harassed by the other shepherds. Jethro, their father, was a Kanyashenti of idolatry, and he was a priest of Midian, and then he rejected idolatry, and he became a pariah. He was ostracized, and his daughters were harassed. Moshe saves them. Eventually Moshe is brought to Jethro. He marries Zipporah, and has a son named Gershom. Meanwhile, in Egypt, this is the end of chapter 2, the condition of the Israelites worsened, and they began to sigh due to their oppressive labor. And they began to cry out to God, and their entreatments ascended all the way to heaven. And the verse tells us God heard their cries, and God remembered the covenant of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob. And God saw their suffering. God paid attention and did not ignore their plight. And immediately read what happened next. After the cries and the sighs and the prayers, we have the episode of the burning bush, where Moshe is told by God to go to Egypt and begin the process of the Exodus. And there's a very interesting comment here in the Ramban. Of course, we know that the experience of the Jews in Egypt, the first reference of that is in Genesis chapter 15. Abraham has the covenant between the parts. God tells him, you should know, Yodo Ateda, you should surely know, that your descendants will be enslaved and oppressed and mistreated in a foreign land for 400 years. The exile was designated to be a 400-year affair. Now, the Exodus actually happened 210 years after the nation's descent into Egypt. So they left 190 years early, at least according to the simple count. When Jacob arrived, that's when the clock began. And 210 years later, that's when the Exodus happened. So they were only there for 210 years, not for 400. They really weren't supposed to leave, says the Ramban. But what happened? They were suffering, and they were sighing, and they were crying, and their tears and their pain and their anguish caused God to expedite the redemption. And indeed, chapter 3 tells of the story of Moshe at the burning bush. Moshe is a shepherd for the flock, for the sheep of Jethro, his father-in-law. And he's by Mount Horeb, he's by Mount Sinai, and he sees a burning bush. The bush is burning, but it's not being consumed by the fire. So Moshe turns to see what's going on, to investigate, and he has a vision. And God appears to him, and God tells him, I've witnessed the suffering of my people. I heard their cries. I know they're suffering. I'm going to go save them and bring them back to the land flowing with milk and honey, the land promised to their forefathers, and I want you to be my representative. Here's the mission. Go to Pharaoh and take the nation out. Now, Moshe's been out of Egypt for decades. This scion of Levi is long out of the picture for the Jews in Egypt. And God gives him the simplest of instructions. Go to Egypt and take the nation out of Egypt. Easy. Easy peasy schmeezy, as we say. And then Moshe begins to object. According to our sages, for 7 days, Moshe is at the burning bush, and he's launching one objection and another objection and another objection, 6 objections in total. He starts off, verse 11 of chapter 3. Who am I? I'm not worthy. I can't do it. I'm a regular person. I'm not someone who's going to alter world history. That's objection 1. Objection 2. Well, to leave Egypt, that's a miracle. The people aren't worthy. Objection 3, or problem 3. What name of God should I say sent me? Meaning, what mode of treatment of God is going to effectuate the Exodus? Number 4, they won't believe me. Number 5, I'm not a man of words. I have a heavy mouth. I have a heavy tongue. I have a speech impediment. And finally, chapter 4, verse 13. Send Aaron instead. And in each objection that Moshe poses, God has a response, a rebuttal. Objection 1, who am I? Who are you to go speak to Pharaoh? You're no one. But I'm going to give you the strength. I'm going to position you to accomplish something that really you have no business accomplishing. Ultimately, it's God who's going to do the Exodus. But he chose you, Moshe. You're his implement. The nation's not worthy? Objection number 2? Yeah, they're not worthy now. That's true. But what's going to be once they go to Mount Sinai? and they receive the Torah, and they have the revelation, then they will be worthy. Okay, so let's treat them now as if they're already worthy, because they potentially they can be worthy. Let's treat them as worthy already now. What name? The name Etka, the name of God that represents God being with them through every part of their suffering, through every dimension and every period of suffering. They won't believe me? Okay, that was a mistake. Moshe accused the nation falsely. He accused them of lack of faith, and right away he gets stricken. His staff turns into a snake. His hand turns leprous. These are all symbolic of the fact that he spoke Lashon Hara. The fifth objection, I cannot speak. I don't have the tools. I have a heavy mouth. I have a heavy tongue. I have a speech impediment. To that God responds, this is 4:11. God said to Moshe, who gives a person a mouth? Who makes a person hearing, speaking, mute, seeing, blind? It's all God. I'll be with you. I'll be with you in your mouth. Yes, you can't do it, but so what? There could be a brick wall in front of a person, but the Almighty will help you get past it. There could be an insurmountable hurdle. There's no way to get past it, but it's okay. The Almighty will send you a miracle. Regarding his final objection to send Aaron, God tells him, Aaron, you worry about Aaron? He'll be happy. He'll be joyous for you in his heart that you are going to lead the nation. With all of Moshe's objections addressed, Moshe accepts the responsibility. He goes to Jethro, gets his permission. He travels to Egypt. He meets Aaron. He convenes the elders of Egypt. And the people believe it's time to go march down to Pharaoh and demand he release the nation. And things don't quite go as planned. They come to Pharaoh. They demand that he release the people. We want to have a festival for God in the wilderness. And Pharaoh dismisses this out of hand. I'm not listening to you. I'm listening to God. Who's this God? I'm not going to send the Israelites out. And then he chides Moshe and Aaron. Why are you disturbing the people? Let them labor in peace. And he tells the taskmasters, don't give them the hay. Don't give them the ingredients to make the bricks, but maintain the daily quota. Instead of Moshe and Aaron's efforts to alleviate the suffering and the pain, the servitude is intensified. The pain and suffering are exacerbated. And the Parsha ends with the nation at an nadir. Since Moshe came to Pharaoh, the nation's situation worsened and they were not saved. And God tells Moshe to end the Parsha. The final verse of the Parsha, you will soon see what I'll do to Pharaoh. He will send you out with a strong hand. He will banish you with a strong hand from his land. It feels like we're already a bit backstage in the Parsha, but let's go a bit further backstage. Let's get to the inner sanctums of the Parsha. The Parsha begins with an enumeration of the sons of Jacob who went down to Egypt. 11 of them came after one of them came. There was a representative of them that preceded them. He was there for a long time. Joseph was in Egypt. Joseph was in Egypt for 22 years before the rest of the family arrived. And he was Joseph. He was unchanged. He was unmoved. He was unimpacted. He was unravaged by the spiritual decay of Egypt. Joseph, the same Joseph who was a shepherd for Jacob. It's the same Joseph who went down to Egypt. It's the same Joseph who was appointed viceroy of Egypt. A 22-year experience did nothing to harm him. There was a 17-year-old boy who was sent to the wolves, and he endured for 22 years. 22 years in the spiritual cesspool, and he doesn't deviate at all from the values of his family. He's the first one. He's the king who paves the path for all those who followed. Joseph pulled off the impossible. When all of his brothers follow, all the 70 souls follow, there's an example to live up to. The whole nation is sent down to Egypt. They grow in Egypt, and they're asked to follow, to emulate Joseph. Joseph pulled off the impossible. You must do the same. But how exactly do you do the impossible? To answer that question, we got to look throughout the Parsha. All boys must be thrown into the water. One boy was thrown into the water, but he was in a box. It was floating. And it just happened to be there's a woman who's going down to the water to go wash off. And she sees the box. And we may think of the water as like a calm, meandering stream. What if it was like a gushing, rushing, swirling river? And there's a box. And it's too far. It's beyond her grasp. She cannot reach it. How far can you reach? If you stretch and you reach, you could maybe get, 5 feet if you're really long. Got longer arms. But if it's 10 feet away, what are you going to do? It's beyond your reach. So what does she do? She stretched her hand out. But you can't reach it, ma'am. Doesn't matter. She stretched her hands out. She grasped at the ungraspable, at what was beyond her hand. And the Almighty made a miracle. Her hand extended. Now, what would happen if she didn't reach out? She didn't extend her hand. Then the miracle would not have happened. Here we see how to do the impossible. The impossible may be a miracle. Well, how do you get a miracle? You stretch your hand as far as it goes. For God, nothing is impossible. Nothing's out of reach. But when a person says, I want it as much as I possibly can, I'm going to stretch to the absolute maximum that I can, well, that creates the conditions. Maybe a miracle can happen. For God, nothing's impossible. But there has to be a receptacle for that miracle. And the receptacle is the person saying, I'm going to do whatever I can. I'm going to go to 100% of what I can do. And once I can't do it anymore, well, it's not my hands, it's the hands of God. And for God, nothing's impossible. We see that idea further. The nation's suffering. The verse tells us that Pharaoh died and they were suffering. Rashi explains something very, very hard to process. Pharaoh died. There's 4 different kinds of people that are considered dead even though they're not actually dead. Well, one of them is someone who is a Metzora, has saras, has leprosy. And Rashi explains, based upon our sages, Pharaoh had leprosy, and they told him you have to bathe in human blood. Pharaoh died, meaning he had leprosy, and what he did was it was so painful, it was so outrageous that they could do nothing but cry. I say this, we have hundreds of Jewish babies slaughtered every day to make this bath. Unimaginable. Unimaginable, even though it is imaginable if you know a little bit about our history. So the people, they cried. And the cries ascended all the way up to heaven. And what happened? Something impossible happened. There was a prophecy. And the prophecy was given to Abraham, chapter 15 of Genesis, by the covenant between the parts. And the prophecy said, you should know, you should surely know. Your descendants will be foreigners in a land that's not theirs. Va'avadum, they'll be enslaved, and they'll be tormented and oppressed. For how long? For 400 years. There's no way to get around that figure. There's no wiggle room. It's set, it's fixed in stone. It's impossible to change it. We have another impossibility in our Parsha. And what do people do? They cry. They pray. Prayer gets around the impossible. Prayer can bring about a miracle. When you say, I can't do it, I'm doing whatever I can, but I can't do anything more than this, God says, okay, I can. For God, nothing's impossible. We could start the count a bit earlier. We can make it retroactive to the birth of Isaac. Voila! The 400 years end after 210 years. It's impossible to get around it. No, it's not. There is a way to do the impossible. Because for God, nothing's impossible. Moshe's given a mission. It's short, it's clear, there's no way to misinterpret it. Go to Egypt and save the Jewish people. Go extract a nation that's enslaved to Pharaoh, the most powerful ruler in the world. And they've been there for 210 years. Go find them all and go bring them out. It's obviously impossible. It's like telling someone, go conquer a country by yourself. Which country? Greenland? No, not Greenland. Take on all of NATO single-handedly. It's not possible. It's impossible. And indeed, Moshe launches all the objections. I'm not worthy. I'm not going to speak before kings. I'm not going to move the needle of world history. And God says, you know what? You're right. It's not possible. But who says you're the person acting here? It's God who's acting here. You're just the tool. You're just the implement. And for God, nothing is impossible. But I have a speech impediment. I have a heavy tongue. I have a heavy mouth. And God responds, who gave a person a mouth? Who makes a person a mute? Who makes a person deaf? Who makes a person seeing or blind? It's all God. God's the only one who makes things. Moshe, there's a false assumption in your objection. I can't do this. Well, if you're saying I can't do this, you're also implying I can't do this, but I could maybe do that. When someone says, well, this list of things are possible for me to do, but this other list, that's impossible for me to do. What if you realize that even the things that you can do, you really can't do? You can't do anything. What if a person realizes that they're completely and utterly impotent in every possible way? What if any sense of competence, of ability, of aptitude, it's all a mirage? You're completely and utterly helpless. You can't even say a single word. You can't even take a single step. You cannot twitch a single muscle. You can't see anything. You can't hear anything. You can't do anything. That's the truth, Moshe. That's the truth. When we put things into buckets of things that are possible, things that are impossible, there's a flawed assumption. The things that are possible are things that we can do. No, we can't do anything. How can we talk? How can we utter anything? How can we do anything? Even the simple things. Even the things that we would label as possible. It's only because the Almighty bestowed upon us the ability to do it. It's only a gift. And if the Almighty is anyhow the only force behind your actions, then nothing is truly impossible. Without God, nothing is possible. With God, nothing is impossible. For God, nothing is impossible. The act of lifting a finger, closing an eyelid, twitching an ear, having a heart pump once, having one breath, all that's easy. As easy as splitting the sea. It's the exact same thing. As easy as effectuating the Exodus. As easy as one person going into Egypt and taking the whole nation out. Nothing's impossible. Nothing's possible for us. Nothing's impossible for God. Everything is easy. And we have a direct line. The nation, they had a very low level of prayer. How did they pray? They didn't address God. They become idolaters like the Egyptians. They sighed. They cried. It's a form of prayer where there's no words even. Even that prayer God hears. We have a direct line to do the impossible. On our own, we're helpless. We're feckless. We're impotent. God is the only one who gives us strength. When we do something, it's only because He might give us strength to do something. When we say we can't do something, we may be saying something which is not true. We may be implying that when we can do something, it too is us. No, we can't do anything without God. And with God, there are no barriers. There are no blockages. The coast is clear. Moshe, you've been out of Egypt for a long, long time. Go there and go save the whole nation. That is a reasonable expectation. I thank you for listening to this edition of the Parsha podcast. We have a brand new book, the book of Exodus. Are you feeling it? Are you feeling it? We're going to have so much fun. We're going to have so much fun together in this book. Please, God. Please, God, we hope and pray that we'll be able to do a podcast on every single Parsha, every single week in the book of Exodus? Together from the Torch Center, from the beautiful, glorious Torch Center in Houston, Texas. My name is Yaakov Wolbe. My email address is Rabbi, spelled R-A-B-B-I. Last name Wolbe, W-O-L-B-E, B as in boy, E as in echo, B as in Bravo, Whiskey, Oster, Lima, Bravo, Echo. For all of our pilots out there, we're very popular, but the pilots told me you cannot listen to the podcast while we're flying the commercial aircraft. They put in the headphones. No one knows. RabbiWolbe.com. Send me your questions, your comments, your feedback. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Magnificent rest of your day. Splendid. Terrific. Awesome rest of your week. And please God, and uplifting and meaningful and powerful and productive and sensational and powerful and exciting and delightful and quiescent Shabbos upcoming. And please God, with the help of the Almighty, we will talk again next week in good health and in good spirits. And again, the address is RabbiWolbe@gmail.com.